and welcome to Pop of Passion. Join me, Jax Barker, comedian and highly sensitive person, along with a guest every other week as we delve into our deepest passions, from being a plant dad to conquering insecurity with comedy. If you relish the memory of an unexpected late-night conversation with a stranger about their obscure passion, the kind where you have tears in your eyes one second and are doubled over laughing the next, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Pop of Passion. I'm Jax Barker and I'm so glad you're here. My guest today won the MVP award for playing football at Catholic school. He is a writer, comedian, and content creator. He co-wrote The Super Carb Diet and Fancy AF Cocktails. You can hear him anywhere you get podcasts on Everything Iconic. Please welcome Danny Pellegrino.
Jax, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to chat with you. And also, I've never been introduced with that fact about playing football before. And I want to somehow add it to my bio because I feel like it makes me seem so much more hardcore than I am. But I did, in fact, win the MVP award for playing football at Catholic school.
That's amazing.
When I was younger.
And yeah. I think you should work that into conversations whenever you get the chance.
Yes. You know, there was like a kind of a longer story about that whole situation because it's a long story. We don't have to get into it, but I'm very proud of that fact. And I'm going to start working it in.
That's awesome. So Danny, what is your passion?
My passion, I think we're going to be talking talk shows, right? Like
yes.
That. I love a talk show. I sort of felt like I gave myself a talk show with my podcast because I was like, nobody else is giving me one. I'm just going to give myself one. And yeah, I grew up just being obsessed with everything from Live with Regis and Kathy Lee. The Rosie O'Donnell show was like huge for me. But I watched a little bit of everything. Anytime a new talk show would come, I remember Donnie and Marie had a daytime show for a minute. And as a young kid, I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited to watch just to like check it out. But I watched, my mom got me into Oprah. There's a great documentary that's airing on CNN right now called The Story of Late Night. And it's fantastic. And we were watching it last night and I was telling my boyfriend about how I used to stay up on specifically Friday nights. My friend and I would get together and we'd watch David Letterman. And I was so enamored by his show. And then Conan started. I was never really a Jay Leno fan, but I would check out sort of any talk show I could because I loved it.
Yeah. So what about talk shows calls to you? Do you prefer like a panel or do you like a one host like situation?
You know, I like all different forms. I mean, currently I watch The View every night. It's sort of my wind down time and it's panel based and I like that. It's something different, but I'd say like the peak for me was the Rosie O'Donnell show. And I remember just really relating to how much she loved pop culture. And it felt like she was me because I loved movies and TV as a kid. And I remember she would have people like Mary Tyler Moore on and she would know more about the Mary Tyler Moore show than Mary did. And so yeah. I think she is what really hooked me. And then I'm endlessly fascinated just by watching people interview other people, even more so now, I think, because I do it on my show and I'm fascinated by how people get in, especially with celebrities. Oftentimes there's different talking points they have to get in and there's certain topics that they have off limits or the PR people will sometimes jump in. And to me, I enjoy the challenge of trying to figure out how I can get in and how I can get them to talk about something that maybe, they wouldn't normally talk about. So I watch talk shows in that way too. And sometimes I hop on YouTube and I'll watch old clips of all of these hosts that I've loved in the past. And I'll just watch them interview and see like what I could take from them. And I love it. And I've been fortunate enough to have a few different talk show host people on my show. And I've learned little tricks. I had Katie Couric on my show. And one of the things she kept doing was she kept saying my name as we were chatting. And it made us both kind of put our guards down a little bit. And it was such a simple thing. And I don't know if we talked about it on the episode or if it was off air, but it really, I noticed it being a little trick, if you will. And I had never thought about it before, but something about it just let both of our guards down. And so now even when I'm interviewing, I try to do that. And it's so simple and small, but I think it does take down people's defenses a little bit.
Yeah, that is really cool. I've enjoyed watching your podcast journey and seeing you interviewing like these huge stars. And it's so cool to see. I also love the Bravo people. But I
Oh
think
yeah, the Bravo people are fun,
I
but
feel like when you interview someone who also interviews, it's like a meeting of the minds. And
it's my
it's
favorite thing,
magic.
Jax.
Yeah, it's
I
really
love it.
cool.
Yeah,
So,
I think the other thing with people who interview, it's like they know if they're coming on a show. I had Andy Cohen on my show, and it was
mhm,
like he comes in, he has a show where he interviews people every single night. So he knows that he's got to bring some pep and some energy and some tea and all of those things because he knows what it's like if someone just shows up and is aloof or not interested. So I do think people who interview for a living, they come into an interview with a little bit extra something.
definitely. So, do you have any like favorite moments from a talk show that you watched when you were growing up that you were like, oh, that's it? Like there's points in my life that I point to where I'm like, oh, that's what I want to do. Do you have that moment?
Yeah, I think going back to Rosie O'Donnell, I remember when she had Barbara Streisand on the first time she had her on and she wept to Barbara. And the thing that I took from that was, and I still think about that moment all the time on my show, is that she was comfortable being very vulnerable and she was she was crying to Barbara and she told Barbara about how much she meant to her and how before her mom passed, Rosie's mom would listen to Barbara and they bonded over that. And I always think about it being okay to be vulnerable because sometimes I think people who are really trained at hosting, they have that sort of red carpet hosting vibe.
Yeah.
But I think that puts a wall up between the interviewer and the audience. And I always think about Rosie, and I think that's why people latched on to her with that initial talk show. And then she did The View, and it was a different kind of thing. But her initial talk show, I think that's why people loved it so much because she wasn't afraid. And the Barbara Streisand one is the one that always latches onto my mind, and it proved what a pop culture lover she was, and yeah. But I look at other interviewers too, even something like Larry King. I remember watching him as a kid, and I loved those long form interviews he did on CNN, and Kelly and or Kathy Lee and Regis. I think Kathy Lee, and I had her on my show too, and I told her it, she has this ability to be very serious and heartfelt and emotional, and then she could be like wacky the next second and like
Yeah.
outrageous. And that to me is such an interesting skill that not many people have. And Kelly Ripa too, who took over for Kathy Lee. To me, she's so charming, and I don't ever think she gets the credit for how good she is at her job. I know I think she's won Emmys, and her show is wildly popular. But to me, Kelly is like one of the best doing it, and I feel like she
Yes.
just is oftentimes overlooked because she makes her job seem so seamless.
Definitely. I remember when you posted on Instagram about her hosting SNL, and it's like, whoa, like she was so and is so great. And I think it's like interesting how so many people are like doing the thing and they're really successful, but they don't have like the public's respect, maybe.
Right.
And she's one of them for sure.
Yeah, I don't know what it is exactly. Even when I posted that clip from SNL, I did get some people who said they didn't care for Kelly, and I'm like, I think she's so phenomenal. And of course, that show live has had a lot of. There's been some drama behind the scenes and stuff that played out in the press, but for the most part, it's like I find her to just be so good at her job, and of course, people love her show, but I just don't think. And you mentioned the SNL clip. She was like wildly funny. I used to watch her show
Yeah.
Hope and Faith, which was a cheesy
Yes.
sitcom, but
Yes.
she was great in it. And she's just got it. And my mom was an All My Children lover. So when
Mhm.
I was younger, I remember literally watching like All My Children and the Rosie O'Donnell show with my mom. And my mom loved Haley and Mateo, which was Kelly and Mark's characters on All
Yeah.
My Children. And so she was, she's just got a magnetic kind of thing that is oddly overlooked, but obviously that's why she stays on TV for so long because there are
Definitely.
people that love her.
Yeah. So you've mentioned your mom, Linda Pellegrino. Now, And I'm just wondering, because I find that I look back to things that I experienced with my mom in childhood, certain movies, or like we watched Gilmore Girls together, and then like I remember being in the theater seeing like My Big Fat Greek Wedding with my mom, and Under the Tuscan Sun, and You've Got Mail, and now those are the things I go back to, and I
Jax, we
wonder
could
if
talk
it's a
about You've
mom
Got Mail.
thing. Yeah,
Couldn't we talk about You've Got Mail for like an hour? I mean, how
yeah,
much time do we have?
absolutely.
Because I feel like
We could go in. I was
you're wearing
earlier.
a Nancy. I gotta tell people you're wearing a Nancy Myers shirt, and I have the exact same one. And right when I saw that, I was like, okay, we're soul sisters. So this
Yes.
is
Well, earlier today, before I showered, I was wearing um, a sweatshirt that said "The Shop Around the Corner," and I actually got a coupon code from your friend Hannah Brown to get that
love Hannah.
sweatshirt.
Yes, it's amazing. I mean, You've
Yeah.
Got Mail to me is that's my number one more than any other
Yep.
movie.
Absolutely.
I'm
It's
sorry, I
so good.
interrupted you though.
No, well, I'm just wondering, like, I think there's something to be said about like bonding with your mom over something and carrying that into adulthood.
Oh, totally. I mean, in the talk show thing, she was the one who introduced me to talk shows because she would always have on before we went to school, or she would have on Regis and Kathy Lee. And then later she loved Kelly, and she would record the Oprah Winfrey show. So at night she would watch it. And yeah, so a large part of my childhood, I actually bonded with my grandmother in the Rosie O'Donnell show because my mom would be there was a large chunk of time where my mom was working. And so I would get home from school, my grandma would be there to watch me, and we would sit and watch Rosie. And her show really appealed to every demographic, that original
Yeah.
talk show. And so that was a special time. My grandma Rose was like incredibly important in my life. And so, yeah, I remember those times. But yeah, they were the ones who introduced me to talk shows. Even at nighttime, my parents always had late night on before bed. They would always watch. When I was really young, I think Carson was still on.
Oh,
And then,
wow.
yeah, because I think he went off in like 91 or 92 or something. And then, yeah, they would watch Leno or Letterman. And so I always just remember talk shows kind of being part of the household. And so I always liked them.
Yeah, it's really cool how you've like taken this passion and you've pivoted it to a different format and you've been so successful.
Oh, thank you.
Did
Thank you. It's
you?
been a pleasure to
Yeah.
be able to interview people. And when I started my show, Everything Iconic, I didn't have access to many people. And so I started doing recaps that were just me on the microphone, just talking about these shows. And that was largely because I didn't have a way to interview people because I had a couple people that I knew or people that I could beg to say, please come on my show. But as the show's grown, it's been just a dream come true to be able to talk to some of these people that I've watched for so many years.
I think that comes across in the interviews. Like, I cry all the time. I have a Pisces moon. But me listening to you talk to Andy Cohen or Katie Couric or Marie Osmond with your mom, like, I get emotional about it
Oh,
because I'm
thank
like, oh
you.
my gosh, I love seeing someone who I enjoy, like, live out their dreams. And it's just so cool to see how
Thank
you've
you.
done this, where it's like, I can imagine you, being a child watching these shows and now you're doing it.
Thank you. I mean, speaking of crying, yeah, I cry. Sometimes I do it in interviews, and then other times I'll like be in the shower afterwards, and I'm like, oh my God, like I can't believe that I got to talk to such and such. Or
Yeah.
yeah, it's exciting for me.
I like last week I wake up really early and I take a long walk and I re-listened to your episode with Cameron Diaz and her business partner, and like right as I'm not allowed to read my emails until I've had coffee. So it takes a while because usually the coffee places aren't open. So anyways, I'm listening and it's the end of the episode and you're reciting that poem and I'm
Oh, I
like
cried.
crying and I open my email and I see an email from you and then I start crying, and it's just
Oh,
like it's so cool how it's all like trickled down and like you've affected so many people. I mean, I'm in a Facebook group with like thousands of people for Everything Iconic. We've done a gift exchange twice.
oh.
Like it's just so cool what you've done that you didn't know when you were a little kid, and now look at what you're doing.
Thank you, Jax. Thank you. You're the sweetest. And that Cameron Diaz moment, I mean, that was like, I loved In Her Shoes, which is that
Yes.
movie where her character says this poem, this E. E. Cummings' poem to her sisters, the character played by Toni Collette. And I remember sitting in the theater crying to that moment. And then I had this weird out of body experience where I'm literally reciting the poem to Cameron Diaz over Zoom. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was a weird kind of out of body experience. But I got really emotional too, I think during that and then afterwards, certainly.
Well, it's
Um,
funny when you talked about like the how when you liked how Rosie got vulnerable because that moment stands out to me listening to you for all these years. And then also you had a medium on your show and you got emotional and that stood out to me. And I think a lot of people connect to the vulnerability and they appreciate it because so many people I'm going to name names. Like, I don't see James Corden getting vulnerable, and he annoys me. But, anyways, I just think like people love to see human moments, and like that's what
yeah.
we appreciate.
I think the good news with the podcast is that you can do long form stuff, so you can kind of get into some stuff that's a little deeper. I've done a couple like interview junkets and like press junkets where they'll give you like a 5 minute slot with the celebrity, and it's really hard to get anything meaningful. But if I have an hour with someone, yeah, that interview you mentioned with Teresa Caputo from
Yeah.
the Long Island Medium, I mean, I went into that interview. I'm not someone who really puts that much weight into psychics or mediums. I mean, I've always been fascinated by it, but I've never put much weight into it. And so I went into that thinking I'm going to talk about some of her past and kind of her life and career, but I wasn't expecting to like get read myself.
Yeah.
And then she brought up my grandma, who I mentioned earlier, and I realized kind of in that moment was that I had, and looking back after that interview, I had a lot of unprocessed grief with my grandma that what I had sort of stuffed down,
Yeah.
because one of the things her and Teresa and I had talked about was I had not been there with my grandma before she passed, and her and I were really, really close. And I had just moved to LA when she got sick. So I never saw her sick. And then she died. Um, then she passed away, and I flew back for the funeral. I did her eulogy. But even now, when I go back home, sometimes I'll be like, oh man, I keep feeling like grandma should be here because I only knew her as well. I didn't know her.
Right.
I hadn't seen her. And I think I had felt a lot of regret of not going back when she did get sick, and a lot of that had to do with financial reasons. I couldn't fly back, and
Mm-hmm.
there was just a lot of stuff. But I left that Teresa interview where I bawled. It's on YouTube, and people like still send me messages on it.
Oh.
Sometimes not so nice messages, but
Oh.
a lot of really nice ones though.
Okay. Good.
But I think that I had a lot of unprocessed grief, and I don't even think it was so much about what Teresa was saying, which I thought was really beautiful and interesting and all of that. But it was like her just saying Grandma Rose to me
Yeah.
snapped something inside of me. And so, yeah, there's moments like that where it's like therapy session for me, which I would have never expected starting a silly podcast. But
Yeah.
um, people might think I'm crazy as I'm telling that story. But
No, it's
I really,
awesome.
I really left it like that was more than any other show I've ever done. That was like a therapy session for me. And I didn't realize how much I had stuffed in.
I feel that deeply. And yeah, I just think the authenticity and the vulnerability is something that we're all craving, especially after this year of the pandemic. I think we're like craving it, and I haven't watched Z-Way's show yet, but I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I have it
Um,
recorded. I'm excited to watch it too.
yeah, do you have any like other recommendations for people who want to get into talk shows? Do you like past or present or future?
You know, I would recommend this documentary called The Story of Late Night. There's only been, I think, two or three episodes that have aired on CNN, but there's also an accompanying podcast about it.
Oh, cool.
That's, I think they're both called The Story of Late Night. If you search that on podcast, you'll find it. Anyway, it's very fascinating. It's the history of late night specifically. So, the story of late night. Is that what I said?
Yeah.
Or did I? Yeah. Okay. Um, it's so fascinating. So I would recommend that. I think also YouTube, I go in these spirals, and I think you can. Rosie O'Donnell's uploading interviews that she did from her original talk show
Oh,
on her YouTube
cool.
channel. And so you can just watch a lot of that stuff. And I just hop on there at night sometimes. Yesterday, almost for 2 hours, I was on YouTube just watching old talk show interview clips, and there's literally every show on there. And you could find, if there's someone you like specifically, just type in, Kathy Lee and NSYNC or something, and you'll find tons of stuff.
Yes. Awesome. So I do a pop themed question for each guest. And mine for you is Pop Talk is a 2011 Tagalog talk show. And if you hosted a talk show, what would it be called and what would it look like?
I hope very soon you'll be able to see, because I'm working on something, but
Breaking news. You
I
don't have
so
to
I
share
hope, but who
anything
knows?
yeah,
Who
yeah.
knows? No, who knows? But I would love to do something kind of pop culture nostalgia based,
Love
and
that.
just a happy, fun kind of thing. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Well, I know it's meant to be happy and fun, but if you find yourself crying, know that I'll be cheering you on because that's my favorite.
well, Jax, I don't go anywhere without crying. I get a haircut for the first time in the pandemic, and I had to like walk out of the place. I had like a little bit of
Oh,
I'm fine. I'm fine.
no, I love it. So I'm going to do my pop passion plug, and then I'll let you do yours and we'll, uh,
Can I ask
close.
you though,
Yeah.
do you have a favorite talk show? Is there one that you really like?
Um, okay, so I was in high school in like the 2007s to 2010. So I was huge on Chelsea Lately. And that was like, I learned about so many cool comics on that now I listen to their podcasts and I follow their careers. And I loved whenever she had like the Kardashians on, you could tell she hated them.
Right.
And it was just so cool. Like I felt cool being up at, 10:30 at night watching a talk show.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of formats for talk shows, I think that format should come back in some capacity where it was her hosting and then she had that panel. And
Yeah.
to me, that's such a slam dunk format for a show. I don't know why or another network hasn't done something similar to that. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that format is like copywritten. So
No.
even if it was, there should be some sort of something lately on another
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be really cool. Um, So, my pop passion plug today comes from my friend Emily. We met in the Chicago improv scene, and even though I have semi retired from improv, we are still great friends. She would like to plug Resilience. It's an independent, not for profit organization dedicated to the healing and empowerment of sexual assault survivors. Through non judgmental crisis intervention counseling, individual and group trauma therapy, and medical and legal advocacy in the greater Chicago metropolitan area. They provide public education and institutional advocacy in order to improve the treatment of sexual assault survivors and to effect positive change in policies and public attitudes towards sexual assault. You can find them and get involved or donate if you're able in the show notes. So, Danny, what is your passion plug?
My passion plug. So, would it be therapy or would it be charity related or?
Sure, it could be a charity. You can plug your Patreon, which I enjoy. You're recapping Sex in the City.
Thank
Anything
you.
you want to plug that you think will bring joy to the listeners.
Well, I think in terms of charity, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm really a big proponent of the Brain and Behavioral Foundation. They do a lot of wonderful work. So I think that's a wonderful organization if people are looking for something to support that's mental health related. And then plug wise, I just watched this show on Peacock called Girls Forever.
Oh, yeah.
It's a silly comedy, and there's just 8 episodes, half hour. And if people are looking for just something to laugh at and giggle at, I think it's really fun and silly. And I wish there was more episodes because my boyfriend and I watched it in like one night. So that's
Yeah.
really good. And then one more. I'm
Yeah,
giving you
do
three.
it. Yeah.
I also, if you're a nostalgia junkie like myself, I think the Mighty Ducks reboot on Disney Plus. If anyone out there has kids, they're looking for something to watch with their kids. I think it's really a special kind of show. And you mentioned Gilmore Girls earlier, so that's why I
Yeah.
thought of it because Lauren Graham's one of the stars. So
She's been playing a single mom for 20 years.
I know. It is sort of weird. I mean, this is a case where maybe I love her. She's the best. But maybe it's a case where this should be her last single mom role because the kids are getting younger and she's getting older. And I always want her to have any role she wants. But, I would like to see her play something different, like a villain or whatever it is.
Oh my gosh, that would be so cool to see her as a villain.
She's so talented, don't you? I just want to see her be a superhero. I want to see her, I don't know, do anything she wants.
Well, you know what? I know you need to go, but she had a deal at, I think it was NBC, where it was like a late night talk show, and she was the host, but it fell through. It was like right after the Gilmore Girls revival, and it was like she was the star, and it was about a late night show.
I mean, it would have been great. Jax, we need it.
I bet they filmed a pilot, and I bet, well, I don't know if I could find it, but I bet you know people who could find it.
I mean, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to go look for it. But yeah, I just want her to do whatever she wants to do. But I would just like to see her play different stuff because we've seen her play that role and she's great at it. But I just want to watch her shine in other stuff.
Yeah, she definitely has the chops, as do you. And
I don't have any acting chops, Jax.
Oh, stop. I think you were in a dinner show theater here in Chicago. I believe I've heard that.
Is Tony and Tina's wedding still going on? It's done now, I think.
So. Yeah.
Oh my God. I miss Chicago. I lived there for a couple of years and I did all the improv scene there and it was the best time of my life living in Chicago. And I remember I would go from like Second City to the IO to Tony and Tina's wedding. And I would ride my bike between the three of them. And I worked at the IO and Second City and I just had the time of my life there.
Awesome. Well, if you're ever in Chicago, you have a stage at the Lincoln Lodge. Thank you, Danny Pellegrino. And thank you for listening to Pop of Passion, produced by Christine Ferrera. Please follow the show on social media at Pop of Passion and at popofpassionpodcast.com. I'm
Jax. I'm going to interrupt you too. I want to tell your listeners, if you like this show, go give Jax a 5-star review on iTunes or Apple or whatever, because it really helps out the podcast. So if you're listening, you like it, just take 2 minutes to go give Jax a 5-star review because she deserves it. She works hard on this. And it's really a simple way that you guys can help.
Oh my gosh, Danny, thank you so much. That reminds me of when Bethany was on your show and you're like, I got to plug the merch because Bethany would want me to plug the merch.
That was a tough one.
Loved it. Loved every moment.
That was a tough hole. We could get into that another time.
Okay, can't wait. So thank you. Go out and be the light, living your passion.